Hi everybody, this is Mary Feaster. This is my Module 6 accessibility evaluation. I chose to do a Word document and a web page that I created. So I'm going to start with the Word document. So I actually used this document as part of a science experiment that I did where I put ice cubes in 4 different colored boxes, black, white, yellow, and red. And we were predicting which one would melt first, which one would melt last. We, did a prediction by coloring or circling the color that would melt first and putting an X on the color that would melt last. And then down here for the actual results, we used numbers and we numbered the boxes 1, 2, 3, and 4 to show the order that the ice cubes melted in. So when I was looking at this, I thought a lot about chapter 8, and I was thinking about all the different things that we do in our, brick and mortar classrooms to differentiate for our students who might have vision or hearing or speech and language, physical limitations, all that kind of thing. And I actually got really intrigued by the comments about, American Sign Language and how, a hearing person, if there are, or a non-hearing person, I'm sorry, if there were closed captions or, captions underneath text and all that stuff of under images and things, they would actually be able to receive the same material that a hearing person would. And how they actually preferred that because they didn't need a translator. And again, they were getting the same exact information that all the other students in the class were getting. So I was trying to look at it through those lenses and think about if I had students in my class, my online class or my in-person class, how would I adapt this? How would I modify this to make it accessible for them? So obviously looking at it through the online aspect, I was using the accessible Word documents, I can't think of what it's called. Oh, the online accessibility handbook. That's what it's called. So I was going through my Word document and I was looking at things like the components and then how would I make it accessible or if it already was accessible. So the first thing obviously that I saw was headings, and I do think that my headings were good. I, wrote what the EQ was at the top and then, here's a prediction, here's the actual results. I probably could have made them a little bit bigger and bolder so that they stood out a little bit more for students. The other thing that I noticed was in terms of like column headers and tables, again, I feel like I did an okay job at putting the header of the table right above it and showing exactly what it was for. I do see that it says about, the all the different things you're supposed to do and to repeat and all that stuff. Again, that's something I would have to take into consideration if I was making this specifically for an online class. And then the biggest thing that stuck out to me was color, because obviously this worksheet has color on it. And it specifically says use sufficient color contrast, which I do think I have. I do think the 4 colors that we chose were also supposed to be contrasted because of the type of activity we were doing. But I also think that lent itself well to the worksheet and it being accessible online, maybe for students who are colorblind or are vision impaired. Now, obviously, if they were completely blind or couldn't see, then we would have to adapt it to make it accessible to them because this would not work. The other thing is it says don't use color alone to convey meaning, which I obviously did here. I didn't give any captions underneath them, so that would be another thing I could do if somebody was colorblind. I could write the word black, white, yellow, and red underneath or inside the boxes, so at least those students could read them. Again, if it was a student who was completely blind or could not see at all, I'm not sure exactly what I would do, but that would have to be completely modified for this worksheet to be accessible for them. So the other thing I was thinking about was, in terms of modifying this, would it be a tier 1, a tier 2, a tier 3? I think some of the modifications would absolutely be tier 1. I could do them and it would be relatively quick and easy, but it could benefit a lot of my students. I do think if I had a student, again, who was almost completely visually impaired, then we would have to do some research on the student, collect data. Maybe I would need help from a support team to help me figure out exactly how to modify this for that student. But overall, I think many modifications I could make to this would be tier 1. They would be, teacher centered. I could do them relatively easily and it would, again, benefit my students. So the next thing I chose to look at was my STEM in Kindergarten webpage, which I actually reviewed on the week where we talked about the online tools. I did Google Sites and I used my website as an example. So I thought it'd actually be great to look at it through a different lens. So again, I took into mind chapter 8, the vision, the hearing, speech and language, physical limitations, all that kind of stuff. And when I looked at the online accessibility handbook, again, I noticed the headings. I do think that I could have included more headings in some of my things. Let's see. So here I just have, the big title at the top and then, excuse me, just the words at the bottom. So I think I could have, maybe put another heading in this area or included something over here. Again, I made some of this really small. I could make the font bigger for people to see. Down here, I included a link, and it says, that when you create a link, you're supposed to put meaningful text that describes its destination. I did not do that. So I could definitely, fix that link and make that say, Maryland instruction curriculum, whatever, to describe exactly where the link is going to take people. The other thing I noticed too was the talk about adding alternative, oops, I'm on the wrong one. I apologize. Adding alt text to describe the images. I don't have that on here, and I don't have that where I put the pictures of my students actually doing things. So again, that would be something I've never done before, but that would be something I could do to help those, again, who might be vision impaired or hearing impaired or speech and language. That could help them understand what the images are supposed to be showing. The other thing I noticed was keyboard accessibility, and it said, any action that you use with the mouse, you should be able to do with the computer or with the keyboard. I'm not sure if you can on this website because I'm not exactly sure what the keyboard shortcuts are. But again, that is something that I would need help to incorporate into my web page if it isn't already there. Again, I'm not even sure how to check that, so I can't say that it does or it doesn't, but that would be something I would for sure have to look into, again, for my students maybe who have physical limitations. The next thing I noticed too was it talked about lists, and I do have a list over here, and I do have lists in my within my pages, and they all have bullets except for this one over here, but I think that's just the way it's set up. But most of them do have bullets, so I think that was a good thing. The next thing I saw was navigation. I do think the navigation is clear and consistent. Like most of the navigation comes from this little drop down bar over here. Now I do think it would take some practice because even sometimes I forget, I have to push the arrow to open up the list below it. Click this to go back out. I think that could get confusing for some students. But overall, I think that it's relatively easy to navigate. You just scroll up. If there's video, you click on the link to make sure, or you click on the play button. In terms of like the videos and things that are in here, they are not captioned. I do know that I was going to say there is a closed caption option. I'm not sure if all of the videos have that or if that's just certain ones. But that would be something I'm not sure how, but I could maybe turn on for each video so that would already be done for students, and those who can't hear would be able to read what the video is saying rather than, just watching a screen and not knowing what's being said. Again, in terms of like it being tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, some of them I think I could do would be relatively simple modifications. Other ones I think, again, depending on the student, would require, data on the student, what they need, maybe help from a support team, or, depending on if they have an IEP or a 504 plan, it might even need to get a little more in depth to make sure I'm meeting those needs. Overall, between both of my Word document and my webpage, the two categories that stuck out most to me for the UDL guidelines was obviously, representation and action and expression. I think a lot of the things, customizing the display of the information, I think, again, that comes with adding the alt text in the images, adding closed captions on videos. Again, that's the same thing, offering alternatives for auditory information, offer alternatives for visual information. All of that could help reach those students who maybe have a disability in one of those areas. The other thing that it talked about was language and symbols, support for decoding of text, mathematical notation symbols. There isn't a ton of mathematical notation or symbols in any of these things that I did. But again, I could add, the color words on my worksheet so that students maybe who couldn't see, could read were colorblind, could see the words. In terms of action and expression, it talks about physical action and, varying the methods for response and navigation. So again, I think that goes back to the web page and, making sure those keyboard shortcuts could work if I had a student who couldn't maybe navigate a mouse. Again, optimizing access to tools and assistive technologies. I'm not sure exactly how my students would be able to write on this and move the page. Again, that would be something I would have to look into in terms of it being an online document. But hopefully that there would be tools that they would be able to access that. The other thing that stuck out to me was building fluencies with graduated levels of support for practice and performance, 5.3 in the table. I think, again, like all of these things would have to be explicitly taught. Students would need help, they would need support. But again, I would need to make sure that I would go that extra level for my students who would have some sort of disability or impairment, to make sure that they are being able to get the same information and have the same success that the rest of the students are.